Impressed with our students.
Yeah.
They seemed to, first of all, a lot of the venues were kind of large, and there wasn't opportunity for direct one-on-one interaction, or not very much opportunity for direct one-on-one interaction between our students and the speakers. But one thing that I realized is I was reading their blogs and their columns that most all of them were doing something for some organization. And they were really digesting it and putting it together in a way that something surprised me. I thought the depth of understanding and some of the nuances that they took away were impressive to me, things I hadn't even thought of, and so they were really learning a lot. It was unbelievable. I've been to several of these through the years, and this was the least well organized of all, and which kind of flies in the face of how you think of the Danish people and the Danish government too. They took, for reasons I don't understand, they took 45,000 pre-registered people, counting all categories of NGOs and state delegates and actual heads of state and so forth, and they only had room in the center for 15,000. So lots of people didn't get in after having spent lots of money and getting there and waiting in the cold, in case of Anthony, maybe for 10 hours and never getting into the meeting. Because I was more optimistic that we would get something, because the word in the again in the press and even in the blogosphere was that we were somewhat close to an agreement whereby developed countries would cut their emissions 80% by 2050, and developing countries would agree to cut emissions on a much retarded later schedule, amounting to perhaps 50% of their emissions by 2050. So the idea was to put the goal far enough out, at least, that we would have an enforceable treaty with milestones along the way. But one rumor, which came from the environmental minister of Britain, you know, these heads of states and environmental ministers and State Department people are all diplomats, and they don't kiss and tell. But one person did, and the British environmental minister said that we were indeed very close to an agreement on just those terms that I mentioned, but China basically vetoed it. Disappointment grew from, I would say, the first day we were there, because it was becoming readily apparent that they just weren't closing deals on any treaties, any formal agreements. And the one that looked like it was ready, the so-called RED, on ecosystems and preserving ecosystems and forests, I thought that was going to be signed and was going to be a formal treaty product of the Copenhagen Accord, and it never did get signed. Oh, I was disappointed. The final accord, it is a step forward, but it's a tiny step forward, and in fact it may not even be realized. The 193 countries, save 5 who've announced that they won't sign it, haven't even signed it yet. So they have until January 31st to do that formally. So even this non-binding Copenhagen Accord has not come to fruition yet, and it's not clear. But even if it does come to fruition, it's not very ambitious, let's say. We use the word fab. It should be ambitious, it should be binding, and it should be fair. And there's people who would say that what we got out of Copenhagen wasn't any of the three: fair, ambitious, or binding. Well, the hope is that, I said in an editorial that I wrote recently, that if we don't begin to make progress, I think all progress since the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, the original climate convention treaty, which we signed and ratified, this country, saying that we need to bring emissions under control, that it's a serious problem. We have signed and ratified that. All that progress could become undone because the only countries right now that have binding legal limits on their emissions is the EU. And the EU industries, I can imagine, are going to be really hard on politicians now who've allowed that to happen, for the EU to get out in front of all the other countries in the world with actual binding emissions and a carbon trading system, and nobody else has it. So I think they're gonna suffer and will probably renege on those promises, change the legislation that they have. So we need to begin to make progress. The only formal process remaining, even though it's maybe bent or broken, is this formal United Nations process. And the 16th meeting of the Conference of the Parties will take place in Mexico City in November of this year, and let's hope for progress there.